The first sensation was cold. Not the gentle chill of morning air, but the bone-deep cold of death itself, slowly retreating from his limbs like a reluctant tide. Commander Dorian Vex tried to move his fingers and felt nothing. Tried to open his eyes and saw only darkness. For a terrifying moment he wondered if he had died after all. Then came the voice, soft, urgent, tinged with desperation. "Commander Vex, wake up, we're losing, again." The words hit him like a physical blow. Losing, again. The memories came flooding back in fragments. The screaming of plasma weapons. The acrid smell of burning atmosphere. The sight of Earth's orbital defense platforms crumbling like paper in the face of the Varnic swarm. He remembered the decision. The terrible final decision to let them put him in the cocoon rather than die uselessly in humanity's last stand. But that had been 3 centuries ago. Light stabbed through his eyelids as the stasis cocoon hissed open, its biomechanical seals releasing with wet, organic sounds. Dorian's enhanced muscles spasmed as feeling returned, every nerve ending, screaming back to life. He tried to sit up and nearly fell, his superhuman reflexes sluggish and uncoordinated. "Easy, Commander. Your body needs time to adjust." The voice belonged to a woman, young by the sound of it with an accent he couldn't place. "The stasis process is difficult to recover from." Dorian forced his eyes open, blinking against the harsh medical lighting. The face that swam into focus was striking, angular features softened by concerned brown eyes, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a white lab coat over military fatigues, and her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked readings on a tablet. "Dr. Elena Cross," she said, noticing his scrutiny. "I'm the one who woke you up. I'm sorry we had to." "How long?" His voice came out as a croak, his throat raw from centuries of disuse. 312 years, 4 months, and 6 days. She didn't need to check her tablet. "The war ended 70 years after you went under. Humanity lost, but we survived." Dorian managed to sit up, his vision clearing. The room around him was clearly underground. Reinforced concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, the hum of air recyclers working overtime. It had the feel of a military bunker, but older, more desperate than the facilities he remembered. "Then why wake me?" He swung his legs over the side of the medical bed, testing his balance. His enhanced physiology was already adapting, strength returning to his limbs with each passing moment. Elena's expression darkened. "Because they came back, the Varnics, but this time it's different, worse." She pulled up a holographic display from her tablet, showing tactical readouts that made Dorian's enhanced mind process the information instantly. "They're not unified anymore. 3 different factions, all fighting each other and us. The war, you knew, was brutal but straightforward. This is chaos. And you think one enhanced soldier can make a difference in a 3-way war?" Dorian stood, pleased to find his legs steady. "I was built to fight the Varnics, not to be a miracle worker." "You were built to be humanity's ultimate weapon," Elena replied, her voice carrying a weight that made him look at her more carefully. "But what we need now might be something else entirely." Before he could ask what she meant, the bunker's lights flickered red, and an alarm began to wail. Elena cursed under her breath, already moving toward the exit. "Combat drill or the real thing?" Dorian asked, falling into step beside her. "With our luck, real thing." She led him through corridors filled with resistance fighters, men and women who looked like they'd been fighting for their entire lives, their faces bearing the hard edges of those who'd seen too much. They watched Dorian with a mixture of hope and skepticism that he found oddly comforting. Legends he'd learned long ago were harder to live up to than to create. The command center was a controlled chaos of activity, screens showing tactical displays and communication feeds. But what caught Dorian's attention was the figure standing in the center of it all. A woman, but not human. Her skin was a pale green, like sea foam, and her hair was a cascade of blonde curls that seemed to catch and hold the light. She was tall, nearly as tall as him, with the lean build of a warrior. But it was her eyes that held him, golden, intelligent, and filled with a pain he recognized. "Commander Vex," Elena said quietly. Meet Kirith, she's complicated. The alien woman turned at the sound of his name, and Dorian felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was dangerous. He could see it in the way she moved, the way her eyes tracked his every gesture. She was a predator, just as he was. You aren't afraid of me, man? Kirith's voice carried a slight accent, musical but with an edge of challenge. Most humans cannot bear to look upon one of the Varniks without hatred. Should I be? Dorian met her gaze steadily. You're here, in a human base, during a red alert. Either you're very brave or very stupid. Something that might have been a smile flickered across her features. Perhaps both. Elena stepped between them, her expression tense. Kirith is a defector. She's been providing us with intelligence about Varnik's tactical doctrine and internal politics. She's also, her voice grew harder, the only reason we knew where to find you. The only reason you found this place? Dorian looked from Elena to Kirith, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. Or the only reason you knew you needed to wake me? Both, Kirith said simply. The faction that seeks to claim this sector has technology that will render your current defenses useless. They call it the Void Scream, a weapon that can crack moons and boil oceans. They will use it within the lunar cycle. 30 days, Elena translated. We have 30 days to either stop them or evacuate. Every human settlement in this sector. Dorian felt the familiar weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders, but this time it felt different. He wasn't just a weapon to be pointed at the enemy. He was part of something larger, more complex. The war had changed, and perhaps he would have to change with it. Then we'd better get started, he said, and meant it. The Titan Awakens, Part 2. Unlikely Allies. The training facility carved into the asteroid's core reminded Dorian of the old military complexes on Mars. All function, no comfort. But the fighters moving through their drills were nothing like the soldiers he remembered. These were survivors, hard-edged and desperate, led by a man who introduced himself as Captain Rex Thorne with the kind of handshake that tested bones. So you're our miracle weapon, Thorne said, circling Dorian like a predator sizing up competition. He was built like a brick wall, scarred from countless battles, with cybernetic implants gleaming along his jaw. 300 years in the freezer, and you're supposed to save us all. I'm supposed to try, Dorian replied, testing the weight of the plasma rifle Elena had provided. It was sleeker than the weapons he remembered, more efficient, but the principle remained the same. What's our tactical situation? Thorne gestured to the holographic display dominating the center of the training area. 3 Varniks factions. Like your girlfriend told you. The purists want to finish what they started, complete human extinction. The expansionists just want our territory, willing to let some of us live as slaves. And the evolutionists, he spat, they want to merge with us, create some kind of hybrid species. Which faction has the Void Scream? The purists. They're led by a war queen called Mordeth. She's the one who broke the original Varnik's unity. Started this whole civil war because she thought the first conquest wasn't thorough enough. Dorian absorbed this information, his enhanced mind already running tactical scenarios. And Kirith? Which faction was she? Evolutionist, until she saw what their merging process actually involved. Thorne's expression darkened. She's been helpful, I'll give her that, but I don't trust anything with Varnik's DNA. Even if that DNA might be the key to stopping them? Especially then. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft hiss of the training room's doors. Kirith entered, moving with the fluid grace Dorian was learning to associate with her species. She wore human military fatigues that had been modified to accommodate her taller frame, but somehow she made the utilitarian clothing look elegant. Commander? She nodded to Dorian, then barely acknowledged Thorne. Dr. Cross wishes to see you in the strategy room. We have received new intelligence. What kind of intelligence? Thorne demanded. Kirith's golden eyes fixed on him with predatory intensity. The kind that might save your pathetic species, human. Thorne's hand moved to his sidearm, but Dorian stepped between them. Enough. We're all on the same side here. Are we? Thorne's voice carried decades of hatred. Because I remember what the Varniks did to Earth. I remember the screaming. So do I, Kirith said quietly, and something in her tone made both men pause. I remember the screaming of my clutch sisters when I refused to participate in the merging experiments. I remember watching them die because I would not help create abominations. The training room fell silent except for the hum of environmental systems. Dorian studied Kirith's face, seeing pain there that matched his own memories of loss. Tell me about the intelligence, he said finally. Elena was waiting in the strategy room with a series of holographic star charts spread across the central table. Kirith identified a weakness in the purest fleet formation, she began without preamble. Their command ship is heavily shielded but relies on a network of support vessels for power distribution. A weakness that conveniently requires us to get close enough for them to vaporize us, Thorne added, arriving with his usual optimism. Not if we approach from the asteroid field in Sector 7, Kirith interjected. The gravity distortions will mask our approach, and their sensors cannot penetrate the metallic ore concentrations. Dorian leaned over the tactical display, his enhanced spatial reasoning processing the three-dimensional maze of asteroids and ship positions. It could work. High risk, but the payoff. He looked up at Elena. What's our objective? Capture or destroy? Capture if possible. We need to understand how the void scream works if we're going to counter it. And if capture isn't possible? Elena's expression hardened. Then we make sure they can't use it. The mission launched 6 hours later. Dorian found himself crammed into a stealth transport with 8 resistance fighters, all of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The ship's pilot, a wiry woman named Torres, kept muttering prayers under her breath as they navigated the asteroid field. First time working with the legend? Asked Sergeant Kim, a compact Asian woman with augmented reflexes that weren't quite as fast as Dorian's natural ones. First time working with anyone in 3 centuries, Dorian replied. You? 3rd mission with intel from our Varniks friend. So far she's batting 1,000. You trust her? Kim considered this. I trust that she wants the purists dead, as much as we do. Sometimes that's enough. The target was a purist patrol ship, isolated from the main fleet and conducting routine scans of the asteroid field. According to Kirith, it would contain tactical data about the Void Scream's deployment timeline. The plan was simple. Disable the ship, extract the data, eliminate any survivors. Simple plans, Dorian had learned long ago, were usually anything but. The attack went flawlessly at first. Their ship's stealth systems kept them invisible until they were practically docking with the Varniks vessel. Dorian's enhanced strength made short work of the airlock, and his superhuman reflexes allowed him to move through the ship's corridors like a ghost of death. The Varniks crew never had a chance. But as they accessed the ship's data core, Dorian realized something was wrong. The information was too easy to find, too conveniently organized. His enhanced paranoia, honed by centuries of warfare, began screaming warnings. It's a trap, he said, just as the ship's communication array activated itself. Clever human, came a voice that seemed to slither through the air itself. The genetic deviant was correct. You are dangerous, but not dangerous enough. The Varniks' fleet materialized around them as their cloaking fields dropped. Dozens of ships, all with weapons trained on their position. Dorian's mind raced through escape scenarios, but there were too many variables, too many unknowns. This is why I don't trust aliens, Torres muttered, her hands flying over the pilot controls. But somehow, impossibly, they made it out. Torres proved she was more than just a competent pilot. She was an artist threading their ship through a maze of plasma fire with skill that bordered on prescient. They lost 2 fighters in the escape, but the rest made it back to base alive. The intelligence was accurate, Elena said later as they debriefed in her private quarters. Kirith couldn't have known it was a trap. Couldn't she? Dorian accepted the glass of real whiskey Elena offered, Apparently, some luxuries had survived the apocalypse. She's Varnix. She thinks like them. She's also risked her life for us repeatedly. Elena moved closer, and Dorian was suddenly aware of how small the room was, how the dim lighting made her eyes seem to glow. She saved your life tonight. Torres said the escape route Kirith suggested was the only one that would have worked. Maybe. Dorian set down his glass and studied Elena's face. Or maybe she's playing a longer game than we realize. Do you trust anyone, Dorian? The question caught him off guard. He'd been a weapon for so long. Trusting had seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. But looking at Elena now, at the concern in her eyes, the way she'd dedicated her life to waking him, to fighting an impossible war, he realized that trust might be the only thing that could save them. I'm learning too, he said, and reached up to touch her face. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. When she opened them again, there was something there that hadn't been before, something that made his enhanced heart beat faster. The mission was a success, she whispered. We have the data we need about the void scream. Elena. She kissed him then, and for the first time in 3 centuries, Dorian Vex felt like more than just a weapon. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deeper as she pressed against him. Her hands found the clasps of his tactical vest, and he helped her remove it, marveling at the simple humanity of the moment. Later, as they lay together in the narrow bed, Elena traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. The genetic modifications, she said quietly. Do they affect everything? Dorian smiled in the darkness. Enhanced stamina has its advantages. She laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I was hoping you'd say that. But even as he held her, part of Dorian's mind was still processing the night's events. The trap had been sophisticated, designed specifically to test his capabilities. Someone among the Varnix factions understood exactly what he was, and that someone was planning accordingly. The war was changing again, and this time, he wasn't sure being humanity's ultimate weapon would be enough. The intelligence Kirith provided led them to what should have been their greatest victory. A massive purist supply convoy, heavily laden with void scream components, moving through a nebula that would mask their approach. 3 ships, minimal, escort, and enough firepower to cripple the weapon program for months. It should have been perfect. Instead, it became a massacre. Contacts, multiple contacts. Torres's voice cracked over the comm as the nebula around them suddenly blazed with plasma fire. It's the entire fucking purist fleet. Dorian watched from the command ship's bridge as their carefully planned assault turned into a desperate fight for survival. Ships that should have been empty cargo haulers were revealed as heavily armed battle cruisers. The nebula that was supposed to hide them became a death trap, filled with mines and automated gun platforms. How many? Elena demanded, her face pale as casualty reports streamed in. 12 ships lost already, Captain Thorne reported, his jaw clenched tight. Maybe 40 survivors total. Pull back, Dorian ordered. Full retreat, emergency jump. But even as their remaining ships fled into hyperspace, he knew the truth. They'd been played. Someone had fed the purists detailed information about their attack plans, their approach vectors, even their ship configurations. The trap had been perfect because it was designed by someone who knew exactly how they thought. The debriefing was ugly. 43 fighters dead, including some of Elena's best people. Equipment they couldn't afford to lose, destroyed, or captured. And worst of all, the purists now knew that humanity had awakened their legendary weapon and found him wanting. There's a spy, Thorne said flatly, his cybernetic implants gleaming as he leaned forward. Someone fed them everything. Ship positions, timing, tactical doctrine, everything. Or, Dorian said quietly, someone with detailed knowledge of Varnix military thinking helped them set the perfect trap. The silence that followed was pregnant with accusation. Elena stood slowly, her face flushed with anger. You're suggesting Kirith betrayed us. I'm suggesting we consider all possibilities. After she's risked her life for us, after she's provided intelligence that saved dozens of lives, Intelligence that's also led us into two traps now, Thorne interjected. Convenient how she's always got an explanation for why things go wrong. Dorian studied the tactical display, his enhanced mind processing patterns and probabilities. The attacks had been too sophisticated, too perfectly timed. Either they were facing a tactical genius among the purists, or someone was feeding them information. "Where is she?" he asked. "Meditation chamber," Elena replied tersely. "She goes there when she's distressed." Dorian found Kirith in the small room that had been set aside for her use. She was sitting in what looked like a lotus position, her golden eyes closed, blonde curls spilling over her shoulders. She looked almost human in the dim light, except for the green tint to her skin and the slightly elongated proportions of her limbs. "You believe I betrayed you?" she said without opening her eyes. "Did you? Would you believe my answer?" Dorian considered this. "Try me." Kirith's eyes opened, and he was struck again by their alien beauty. "My people have a saying, truth shared is pain divided. But humans seem to prefer their pain concentrated, distilled into pure hatred." "That's not an answer." "Isn't it?" She stood with fluid grace, and Dorian realized she was taller than him, something that rarely happened. "You want to know if I led your people into a trap? The answer is yes, but not by choice, and not by design." "Explain." Kirith moved to the room's single small window, looking out at the stars beyond. "My people communicate through bioelectrical fields, what you might call telepathy, though it's more complex than that. When I defected, they couldn't simply cut me off. There are resonances, echoes. You're saying they can read your mind?" "Not exactly, but intense emotions, strong memories. These create patterns they can interpret. When I learned of your attack plans, when I felt the excitement and hope of potential victory." She turned back to him, and her expression was devastated. "I did not know they could still reach me. I thought the distance, the time would be enough." Dorian studied her face, looking for deception. His enhanced senses could detect micro-expressions, changes in heart rate and breathing. But Varnick's physiology was different. Still, the pain in her eyes seemed genuine. "Why should I believe you?" "Because," Kirith said, moving closer, "if I wanted to betray you, I would have done it when you were still in stasis. One message to the purists, and they could have claimed this base before you ever awakened." It was a good point, but Dorian wasn't ready to let his guard down. "Maybe you're playing a longer game, or maybe," Kirith said, now standing close enough that he could smell her, something like ozone and flowers, distinctly alien but not unpleasant. "You're looking for reasons not to trust because trust makes you vulnerable." Before he could respond, the chamber's door slid open and Elena entered, her face flushed with anger. "So this is where you went? To interrogate our ally?" "To get answers," Dorian replied, "from someone who's done nothing but help us." Elena moved to stand beside Kirith, and Dorian noticed how naturally they seemed to fit together. The human, woman's compact strength complementing the alien's elegant height. While good people died because we trusted intelligence that was compromised. "Elena, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Her brown eyes blazed with fury. "You can't accept that the great Commander Vex might have limitations. That being a genetically enhanced super soldier doesn't make you infallible." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Dorian felt something twist in his chest, a pain that his enhanced physiology couldn't heal. "That's not, isn't it?" Elena stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more force than a shout. "You've been looking for someone to blame from the moment the mission went wrong. Anyone but yourself. Enough." Kirith's voice cut through, their argument like a blade. "Your pain is understandable, both of you, but it changes nothing. The purists still have the void scream. They still plan to use it, and we still have only days to stop them." Elena turned away, her shoulders shaking. Dorian realized she was crying, not the dramatic sobs of despair, but the quiet tears of someone who'd held strong too long and finally reached her breaking point. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. You're right. I was looking for someone to blame. 43 people died today, Elena whispered. People I've known for years. People who trusted me to keep them alive. Kirith moved to Elena's side, her long fingers gently stroking the human woman's hair. The gesture was tender, intimate in a way that made Dorian's enhanced heart skip. There was something between them, he realized, something that had grown in the weeks before his awakening. They died as warriors, Kirith said softly, fighting for something greater than themselves. Among my people there is no more honored death. Your people caused this war. Yes, and some of us are trying to end it. Dorian watched them together, feeling something shift in his understanding. Elena's hand had found Kirith's, their fingers intertwined. The alien woman's golden eyes met his over Elena's head, and in them he saw not deception or manipulation, but genuine affection. Love, perhaps, though he wasn't sure the concept translated across species. The bioelectrical resonance, he said suddenly. Could it work in reverse? Kirith's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? If they can read your emotions from a distance, could you feed them false information? Make them believe something that isn't true? Theoretically, yes, but it would require... She paused, her alien features shifting into an expression of concentration. It would require me to believe the false information myself, to feel genuine emotions about events that haven't happened. Could you do it? The cost would be considerable. To create such deception, I would have to fragment my consciousness, create false memories and emotional responses. It might drive me insane. Elena lifted her head, her tear-stained face fierce with determination. There has to be another way. There is, Dorian said quietly. But you're not going to like it. Both women looked at him expectantly. I go in alone. No fleet, no army, just me. Infiltrating their command ship while they're focused on the Void Scream deployment. If I can't stop the weapon, maybe I can at least damage it enough to buy us time. That's suicide, Elena said flatly. Maybe. Or maybe it's what I was actually designed for. Not to lead armies or win wars, but to be exactly what they made me. A weapon that could strike where armies couldn't go. Kirith studied his face with those unsettling golden eyes. You would do this, knowing you likely wouldn't return? I would do this knowing that people I care about would be safe. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Elena spoke. If you're going, you're not going alone. I designed the systems that modified you. I understand your capabilities better than anyone. And I, Kirith added, know the ship layouts and security protocols. You'll need both of us. Dorian felt something warm spread through his chest. Not the heat of passion, but something deeper and more complex. Trust, perhaps. Or maybe just the recognition that he was no longer facing the universe alone. Together, then, he said, and meant it. Elena's discovery came at 0300 hours, when the base was quiet except for the hum of life support systems and the distant sound of Thorne's patrols making their rounds. She burst into Dorian's quarters without knocking, her eyes bright with exhaustion and excitement. I found them, she said breathlessly. The Peace Faction. They're calling themselves the Synthesis. Dorian sat up, instantly alert. Where? Hidden in the outer rim in a system the star charts list as dead. Kirith was right. There are Varniks who want to end this war. Elena pulled up a holographic display from her tablet, showing communication logs and astronomical data. They've been trying to contact us for months, but their messages were being intercepted by purist agents. How do we know this isn't another trap? Because, Kirith said from the doorway, the encryption they used is from the old evolutionist protocols. Before the schism, before the madness took hold, she entered the room with that fluid grace Dorian had learned to associate with her, but there was something different in her posture. Hope, perhaps, mixed with a fear he was beginning to recognize. You know these encryption codes? Elena asked. I helped design them. In the early days when we still believed evolution could be guided rather than forced. Kirith's golden eyes met Dorian's. The synthesis faction is led by Karleth, my clutch sister. We were separated when I refused to participate in the merging experiments. Your sister, Dorian said quietly. The one you thought was dead. The one I hoped was dead, rather than what I feared she had become. Elena moved closer to both of them, her excitement barely contained. Don't you see what this means? We don't have to infiltrate the Purist command ship. We don't have to sacrifice ourselves trying to stop the Void Scream. We could end this entire war. By trusting aliens who've been trying to exterminate us for 3 centuries. Thorne's voice cut in from the doorway. He stood there in full combat gear, his cybernetic implants gleaming in the dim light. Forgive me if I'm not ready to break out the champagne. How long have you been listening? Dorian asked. Long enough to hear you planning to throw away humanity's last advantage. Thorne stepped into the room, his hand resting on his sidearm. We have a weapon that can win this war, you, and you want to waste it on peace talks with the same species that turned Earth into a graveyard. The same species that's offering to help us prevent that from happening again, Elena countered. According to one defector whose sister conveniently leads this peace faction. Thorne's eyes fixed on Kirith with undisguised hostility. How do we know this isn't the longest con in galactic history? Kirith straightened to her full height, towering over the human captain. You don't. You have only my word, and I understand why that means nothing to you. Your people have suffered greatly at the hands of mine. Damn right they have. But, Kirith continued, consider this. If I wanted to deliver you to the Purist, why would I create such an elaborate deception? Why not simply reveal your location when Commander Vex was still in stasis? Because maybe you want something bigger than just killing us, Thorne replied. Maybe you want to break us completely, make us hope, then crush that hope. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Dorian could see the logic in both positions. Thorne's paranoid caution born from centuries of warfare, and Elena's desperate hope for a solution that didn't require more death. But it was Kirith's position that intrigued him most. She had everything to lose and nothing to gain from this proposed meeting. What does your sister want? He asked. To stop the Void Scream deployment, to end the Civil War, to find a way for our species to coexist without one destroying the other. In exchange for what? Kirith hesitated, and in that pause Dorian heard volumes. The synthesis faction believes that true evolution comes through cooperation, not conquest. They want to share knowledge, technology, even genetic material, but freely given, not taken by force. Genetic material, Thorne spat. So they still want to change us. They want to offer us the choice to change ourselves. There's a difference. Elena moved between them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years keeping desperate people alive. We're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to determine if this contact is legitimate. If it is, we evaluate their proposal. If it isn't, we're no worse off than we are now, except for walking into another trap, Thorne pointed out. Then we plan for that possibility, Dorian said. We go in expecting betrayal but hoping for something better. The meeting location was a derelict space station in the graveyard system. Its corridors dark and its atmosphere thin but breathable. Dorian, Elena, and Kirith arrived in a small, fast ship, while Thorne waited in the outer system with a strike force, ready to extract them or exact revenge as circumstances required. The station felt haunted, not just empty, but filled with the ghosts of whatever civilization had built it. The architecture was neither human nor Varnix, all flowing curves and organic shapes that seemed to pulse in the dim emergency lighting. Who built this place? Elena whispered, her voice echoing in the vast corridors. The builders, Kirith replied, the first species to achieve faster-than-light travel in this galaxy. They vanished long before my people evolved beyond our homeworld. Vanished how? No one knows. They left behind structures like this, ancient, beautiful, and completely empty. They found the meeting chamber at the station's heart, a vast spherical room with walls that seemed to shimmer with their own light. Waiting for them was a figure that made Dorian's breath catch, another Varnix, but different from Kirith in subtle ways. Where Kirith was tall and elegant, this one was broader, more muscular. Her skin was a deeper green and her blonde hair was shorter, more practical. But the eyes were the same, golden and intelligent, filled with an alien beauty that was both familiar and unsettling. "Sister," Karleth said, using English but with an accent that made the words sound like music. "Sister," Kirith replied, and Dorian could hear centuries of pain and longing in that single word. The reunion was awkward, formal, as if neither quite knew how to bridge the gap of time and ideology that separated them. But when Karleth produced a data crystal containing the technical specifications for the Void Scream and offered it freely to Elena, Dorian began to believe that this might actually be legitimate. "The weapon is more dangerous than you realize," Karleth explained as Elena studied the data. "It doesn't just destroy matter, it tears holes in space-time itself. Each use makes the universe a little more unstable." "How many times can it be used?" Dorian asked. "Unknown. Our scientists believe somewhere between 50 and 100 deployments before the fabric of reality begins to collapse in this region of space." Elena looked up from her analysis, her face pale. "They're planning to use it on inhabited systems? 17 human colonies plus your primary military installations. After that?" Karleth's expression was grim. "After that, they believe the survivors will surrender unconditionally. And if they don't? Then they continue firing until there's nothing left to surrender." The implications hit Dorian like a physical blow. This wasn't just about winning a war. It was about committing genocide on a scale that would make the original Varnix conquest look restrained. "What do you propose?" "Why?" he asked. "Joint strike," Karleth replied immediately. "Synthesis forces and human resistance working together to disable the weapon before it can be deployed." "In exchange for what?" "Ceasefire, formal peace talks, and—" She hesitated, glancing at her sister. "Sanctuary for those of our people who refuse to participate in genocide." It was Elena who asked the question that hung in the air between them. "How many of your people would accept such an arrangement?" "Unknown. The synthesis faction controls perhaps 30% of our remaining fleet strength. Another 20% might be convinced to join us if we can demonstrate that cooperation is possible. That leaves 50% still committed to wiping us out," Dorian pointed out. "Yes, which is why we need your help." The debate that followed was intense, with Elena advocating for the alliance and Dorian playing devil's advocate, probing for weaknesses in the plan. But it was Kirith who provided the crucial insight. "The purists fear evolution above all else," she said. "They see cooperation with humans as the ultimate corruption of Varnix purity. If we can demonstrate that such cooperation makes us stronger rather than weaker—" "We split their faction," Dorian realized, "turn their ideology against them." Exactly. It should have been a moment of triumph, the first real hope for peace in centuries. Instead, it was shattered by the sound of plasma fire echoing through the station's corridors. "Thorn," Elena breathed, and Dorian realized what had happened. The captain had decided that peace was too dangerous to risk. They fought their way through the station as Thorn's strike force battled both synthesis ships and a purist fleet that had apparently been tracking the peace negotiation. In the chaos, Dorian found himself fighting alongside Varnix soldiers. For the first time, their alien weapons complementing his enhanced abilities in ways that surprised him. But it was too late to save the peace talks. Karleth died covering their retreat. Her last words a promise to Kirith that the synthesis would remember this meeting, that they would continue to seek peace even if the humans were not ready for it. The final battle began not with the thunder of fleets clashing, but with the quiet hum of a single stealth ship approaching the purist command vessel. Inside, Dorian checked his weapons one last time while Elena ran diagnostics on the portable quantum disruptor they'd built from Karleth's data. Kirith sat in meditation, her mind reaching out across the void to make contact with the scattered synthesis cells throughout the purist fleet. 30 seconds to docking, Elena announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Synthesis forces are in position, Kirith reported, her golden eyes opening. But Captain Thorne's fleet is also moving. He intends to attack regardless of our success. Dorian felt the familiar calm that came before combat, his enhanced physiology, optimizing itself for the violence ahead. But this time something was different. He wasn't just a weapon pointed at the enemy. He was part of something larger, more complex. A bridge between species, between war and peace. Then we'd better make this count, he said. The docking was flawless, their ship's stealth systems keeping them invisible until the last moment. Elena's modifications to the airlock mechanisms made short work of the purest vessel's defenses, and within minutes they were moving through corridors that hummed with alien energy. The purest ship was a marvel of biotechnology, its walls pulsing with organic patterns that seemed almost alive. Kirith moved through it like a ghost, her knowledge of Varnic's architecture guiding them past security checkpoints and patrol routes. But it was Dorian's enhanced senses that detected the ambush waiting for them in the central corridor. They know we're here, he whispered, pressing himself against the curved wall. 6 hostiles, maybe 8. Heavy weapons. Elena's fingers flew over her tablet, analyzing the ship's internal sensors. The Void Scream control chamber is 3 levels up. If we can reach it, we will, Kirith said firmly. But first, we clear the path. The fight was brutal and swift. Dorian moved like a force of nature, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dance between plasma bolts while his return fire found its mark, with superhuman precision. But it was the coordination between the 3 of them that turned the tide. Elena's tactical analysis, Kirith's knowledge of Varnic's combat doctrine, and Dorian's physical capabilities combining into something greater than the sum of its parts. As the last purest warrior fell, alarms began wailing throughout the ship. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in harsh red, and through the biomechanical walls they could hear the deep thrumming of the Void Scream charging sequence. They're starting the firing sequence, Elena said, her face pale in the crimson light. We have maybe 10 minutes before they can target the first colony. They ran through corridors that seemed to shift and pulse around them, the ship's organic systems responding to the crisis. Twice they encountered security checkpoints, and twice Dorian's enhanced strength tore through barriers that should have stopped an army. But it was when they reached the control chamber that their real challenge began. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows, dominated by a pulsing, crystalline structure that seemed to bend space around itself. Standing before it was a figure that made even Dorian pause, a Varnic's war queen easily 8 feet tall, her green skin dark as jade and marked with scars from countless battles. Her blonde hair was woven with metal threads that caught the light, like silver fire. So, Mordeth said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command, the human weapon comes to face me at last, and brings his alien whore and human pet. We're here to stop the Void Scream, Dorian replied, stepping forward. Stand down and we can discuss terms. Mordeth's laugh was like breaking glass. Terms? With inferior species? I think not. She gestured to the crystalline structure, which pulsed brighter. In 8 minutes, the first human colony dies. In 8 hours, they all die. And then we can finally cleanse this galaxy of your stain. The weapon will destroy space-time itself, Elena said desperately. You'll kill everything, not just humans. Better a pure void than a corrupted existence. Kirith stepped forward, her golden eyes blazing. You're insane, Mordeth. This isn't evolution. It's extinction. Spoken like the traitor you are. Did you think I didn't know about your sister's pathetic peace faction? About your own corruption by these creatures? The War Queen's hand moved to a biomechanical interface, and suddenly the chamber was filled with purest warriors. Not just the soldiers they'd been fighting, but elite guards whose weapons hummed with deadly energy. Kill the human pets, Mordeth commanded. But bring me the traitor alive. I want her to watch as her beloved colonies burn. The battle that followed was like nothing Dorian had ever experienced. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to move between the purest warriors like lightning, but there were too many of them and they were too well trained. Elena fought with desperate skill, her modified pulse rifle finding its mark again and again. But she was only human. It was Kirith who turned the tide. As the battle raged, she placed her hands on the chamber's biomechanical walls and began to sing, a haunting melody that resonated through the ship's organic systems. Slowly, impossibly, the ship itself began to respond to her call. Synthesis. Protocol, she explained breathlessly as security doors began sealing off sections of the chamber. The ship remembers when we were united. But Mordeth was far from finished. With a roar of rage, she launched herself at Kirith, her claws extended and glowing with energy. The two Varniks crashed together in a tangle of limbs and fury, their alien strength making the very air crack with the force of their blows. Dorian tried to reach them, but more warriors poured into the chamber. He found himself fighting back to back with Elena, their movements synchronized by hours of training and something deeper, a connection that transcended species. The disruptor, Elena gasped, dodging a plasma bolt. If I can get to the control matrix. Go, Dorian said, his enhanced strength allowing him to literally throw a purist warrior across the chamber. I'll cover you. Elena ran toward the crystalline structure while Dorian carved a path through the enemy forces. But as she reached the control matrix, Mordeth broke free from her fight with Kirith and intercepted her, massive claws reaching for Elena's throat. Time seemed to slow as Dorian realized he couldn't reach them in time. Elena was going to die, and with her any hope of stopping the void scream. But then Kirith was there, throwing herself between Mordeth and Elena, taking the War Queen's claws in her own chest. Sister, Elena cried, catching Kirith as she fell. Stop, the weapon, Kirith gasped, green blood flowing from her wounds. For all our sakes. Elena's hands shook as she connected the quantum disruptor to the control matrix. The device whined to life, its energy field beginning to interfere with the Void Scream's charging sequence. But Mordeth wasn't finished. With a shriek of fury, she raised her claws for a killing blow. She never got the chance to deliver it. Dorian's plasma rifle spoke once, the bolt catching the War Queen's center mass and sending her tumbling backward. She hit the chamber wall with enough force to crack the biomechanical surface and didn't get up. It's working, Elena said, her voice tight with concentration as she fine-tuned the disruptor. The weapon's powering down. But even as the immediate crisis passed, Dorian could hear the sound of battle echoing through the ship. Thorn's fleet had arrived, and they were fighting both purist and synthesis forces indiscriminately. The captain's hatred ran too deep to allow for peace even now. We have to stop him, Dorian said, helping Elena support the wounded Kirith. How? Elena asked. He has a full battle fleet. But we have something he doesn't, Kirith said, weakly. We have allies. As if summoned by her words, the chamber's communication array crackled to life. Voices filled the air, human and Varniks, speaking in a dozen languages but united in purpose. Synthesis forces throughout the fleet were turning on their purist commanders. Human resistance cells were coordinating with alien rebels. And in the space around the command ship, a new kind of battle was taking shape, not human versus Varniks, but those who chose war against those who chose peace. The fighting lasted for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Faced with a united front of humans and Varniks working together, the extremists on both sides found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Thorn's fleet withdrew after losing half its ships to combined forces. The remaining purist vessels either surrendered or fled into the outer rim. In the aftermath, as medical teams treated the wounded and engineers worked to fully disable the Void Scream, Dorian found himself in the ship's observation deck with Elena and Kirith. The alien woman was heavily bandaged but alive, her golden eyes bright with something that might have been hope. So what happens now? Elena asked, her head resting on Dorian's shoulder while her hand held Kirith's. Now we learn, Kirith replied. We build. We try to create something neither of our species has ever seen before. A future worth fighting for, Dorian added, understanding finally what his real purpose had always been. Not to be humanity's,